Thieves like you don't belong in this neighborhood, or in that Rolls-Royce. Eleanor Whitfield snapped, jabbing a manicured finger at Nathaniel Brooks. He stood beside the gleaming car without moving while she circled him like she'd already decided the verdict. The midday sun flashed off the polished grille as neighbors stepped onto their porches, drawn by the shouting. Eleanor yanked out her phone, bracelets clinking sharply. "Yes, send the police," she said loudly. "There's a man here trying to steal a luxury car." Minutes later, a patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac, and two officers stepped out, their eyes moving between the furious woman and the calm stranger beside the Rolls-Royce. Eleanor rushed toward them, loudly accusing Nathaniel of being a thief. He didn't argue or step away. And Eleanor Whitfield had no idea the quiet man she was trying to have arrested was the one person who could dismantle her entire world with a single sentence. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The gleaming white Rolls-Royce purred to a stop along the immaculate curb of Maple Grove Court. Nathaniel Brooks settled the vehicle into park, its pristine finish catching the late morning sun. He'd arrived early for the strategy meeting, as was his habit. Preparation and precision had served him well over decades of building his company from nothing. The tree-lined street stretched before him, a picture of suburban perfection. Identical rows of pruned hedges and manicured lawns surrounded colonial-style homes with glossy front doors. Nathaniel adjusted his dark suit jacket and reached for his leather portfolio, ready to review the acquisition documents one final time before the afternoon discussion. He had just stepped out of the car when movement caught his eye. Eleanor Whitfield emerged from behind her oversized front door, her designer heels clicking rapidly against the concrete of her driveway. Her face was already twisted with suspicion and anger as she approached, designer handbag swinging from her arm. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet street. "Whose car is that?" Nathaniel turned toward her slowly, maintaining his composed demeanor. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield. I'm Nathaniel Brooks. I'm here early for our scheduled meeting this afternoon." "That car!" Eleanor cut him off, jabbing a manicured finger toward the Rolls-Royce. "Where did you get it? Who does it belong to?" "As I was saying, I'm Nathaniel Brooks. The car belongs to me," he replied evenly, reaching for his briefcase where his documentation was stored. Eleanor let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please, you expect me to believe that? In this neighborhood?" She took another step forward, her voice rising. "I want to know right now whose car you've stolen and why you're lurking outside my house." Movement flickered in nearby windows. A woman walking her small dog across the street slowed her pace, openly staring. 2 houses down, a man paused while watering his flowers, garden hose forgotten in his hand. "Mrs. Whitfield," Nathaniel said carefully, his tone remaining professional despite the growing audience. "I understand your concern, but I assure you—" "Don't you dare patronize me!" Eleanor snapped, her voice echoing off the brick facades. "I know every person who belongs in this neighborhood, and you most certainly do not." She emphasized the last words with clear disdain, looking him up and down as if his tailored suit meant nothing. More neighbors appeared. A teenage boy stopped his bike at the corner. An older couple emerged onto their front porch, whispering to each other. The quiet street had become an impromptu theater, with Eleanor playing to her growing audience. "I've lived here for 15 years, she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I know what kind of people drive these kinds of cars." She gestured dismissively toward Nathaniel. "And they don't look like you." Nathaniel felt the familiar weight of these moments settle across his shoulders. He'd faced them before. In college, in boardrooms, in country clubs. The constant requirement to prove his right to occupy spaces others took for granted. He kept his expression neutral, even as he noted curtains twitching in nearly every house on the street. Mrs. Whitfield, I have all the documentation for the vehicle right here, he began, maintaining eye contact, as well as the meeting confirmation from your husband's office. If you'll allow me to— Oh, I'm sure you have documentation, Eleanor interrupted with a sneer. I'm sure you have all sorts of papers. But that doesn't explain why you're hanging around our homes in the middle of the day when everyone's at work. A small crowd had gathered now, maintaining what they probably thought was a discreet distance. Some had phones out, recording the confrontation. The sun beat down on the scene, harsh and revealing, as Eleanor continued her public performance of outrage. This is exactly what's wrong with society today, she declared to her audience. People thinking they can just walk into decent neighborhoods and take whatever they want. Well, not here. Not in my neighborhood. Nathaniel stood perfectly still, his hand still resting on his briefcase. Decades of experience had taught him that any movement, any flash of justified anger, would only feed into her narrative. The weight of eyes on him was familiar, the same weight he'd carried while building his company, while closing deals, while proving himself over and over in rooms where he was the only black face present. Eleanor pulled her phone from her designer bag, her movements dramatic and purposeful. Her fingers jabbed at the screen as she kept her eyes locked on Nathaniel, her expression full of righteous satisfaction. Since you won't tell me the truth about whose car you've stolen, she announced, raising the phone to her ear, I'm calling people who will get answers. She straightened her spine, clearly relishing her perceived power in the moment. Yes, hello. I need to report a suspicious person with a stolen vehicle. The morning sun continued to shine brilliantly on the pristine white Rolls-Royce, the same sun that illuminated the ring of neighbors now openly watching. Their faces a mixture of curiosity, concern, and, from a few, discomfort at the scene unfolding before them. Yet none stepped forward to intervene as Eleanor began her performance for the 911 operator, her finger still pointed accusingly at Nathaniel like a judge pronouncing sentence. 2 police cruisers rolled into Maple Grove Court, their arrival breaking the tense standoff. Eleanor's face lit up with vindication as she hurried toward the vehicles, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. Officer Elena Ramirez stepped out first, followed by her partner, Officer Paul Donnelly. Officers, thank goodness you're here, Eleanor called out, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. That man over there, he's trying to steal this expensive car. In broad daylight. Can you believe the nerve? Nathaniel remained where he stood, one hand resting lightly on the Rolls-Royce's polished hood. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, making the white paint gleam like a spotlight. More neighbors had gathered, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Some held phones up, recording everything. Officer Ramirez approached carefully, her expression professional but guarded. Sir, could you step away from the vehicle, please? Of course, officer. Nathaniel's voice remained steady as he took 2 measured steps back. His movements were deliberate, non-threatening, a dance he'd performed too many times before. See how cooperative he's being, Eleanor stage whispered loudly. That's because he knows he's caught. I saw him lurking here, casing our homes, probably. Officer Ramirez held up a hand to quiet Eleanor. Ma'am, please let us handle this. She turned back to Nathaniel. Sir, I'll need to see your identification and vehicle registration. Certainly. Nathaniel reached slowly for his briefcase, maintaining eye contact with the officer. The registration is in the glove compartment. Would you like me to retrieve it? I'll get it, Officer Donnelly volunteered, moving toward the passenger side. Nathaniel produced his driver's license and handed it to Officer Ramirez. Eleanor craned her neck to see, her lips pursed in anticipation of being proved right. Nathaniel Brooks, Officer Ramirez read aloud, studying the ID carefully. That must be fake, Eleanor interjected immediately. Anyone can get fake ID these days. You should run it through your system. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. Someone whispered, "She might have a point." Another voice added, "Never seen him around here before." Officer Donnelly emerged from the car with the registration papers. He compared them to the license, then showed them to his partner. Officer Ramirez examined both documents carefully before looking back at Nathaniel. "These appear to be in order, Mr. Brooks," she said. Eleanor's face flushed red. "No, that's impossible. Check again. Those documents have to be forged." She pulled out her phone, starting to record. "I'm documenting this whole thing. For everyone's safety, of course." Nathaniel felt the familiar burn of humiliation beneath his calm exterior. Every pair of eyes on the street seemed to pierce him, questioning his right to stand there, to own something beautiful, to exist in this space. "The documents are legitimate, Mrs. Whitfield," Officer Ramirez stated firmly. "The vehicle is registered to Mr. Brooks." "Well, there must be some mistake," Eleanor insisted, her voice rising higher. "Look at him. Look at this car. Do you really think someone like him could afford a Rolls-Royce?" She gestured wildly with her free hand while keeping her phone trained on Nathaniel. "This is a safe neighborhood. We have standards here." The words hung in the air like poison. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Officer Donnelly ran the plates through their system, while Officer Ramirez maintained her position between Nathaniel and Eleanor. "Everything checks out," Officer Donnelly confirmed after a moment. "The vehicle belongs to Mr. Brooks." Eleanor's nostrils flared. "No, no, no. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? Who my husband is?" She stepped closer, her phone still recording. "My husband is an executive at one of the biggest logistics companies in the country. We know what sorts of people can afford cars like this." The sun continued to beat down on the scene, highlighting every detail of this public theater. Eleanor's righteous anger, the officer's professional discomfort, the neighbors' watchful stares, and Nathaniel's carefully maintained composure. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Eleanor demanded of the officers. "This man shows up in our neighborhood, in this car, and you're just going to take his word for it? People like him don't just show up in cars like that. They don't belong here." Each word was another cut, precisely aimed and delivered with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for their assumptions. Nathaniel stood perfectly still, his suit jacket growing warm in the midday heat, watching Eleanor perform for her audience. She was marking her territory, asserting ownership not just of her street, but of truth itself. "Mrs. Whitfield," Officer Ramirez tried again, "we've verified the vehicle's ownership. There's no crime being committed here." "Oh, there's definitely a crime," Eleanor snapped, still filming. "Maybe not one you can see, but I know better. My husband works for Wallace and Mitchell Logistics. We know what success looks like in this town, and it doesn't look like him." Nathaniel allowed the weight of Eleanor's words to settle in the summer air. Her phone remained pointed at him, recording every moment of what she clearly thought would be her triumph. The gathered neighbors shifted their weight from foot to foot, caught between discomfort and curiosity in the unfolding drama. And what exactly does Wallace and Mitchell Logistics have to do with this situation? "Mrs. Whitfield?" Nathaniel's voice carried across the driveway with perfect clarity, each word measured and precise. Eleanor's lips curled into a smug smile. "Everything. My husband is an executive there. We know every important person in the industry. And I can tell you right now, there's no way. I own your husband's company." 5 words. Simple. Direct. Delivered without anger or satisfaction. Just a statement of fact that crashed into Eleanor's performance like a wrecking ball through glass. The phone in Eleanor's hand wavered. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no sound emerged. Several neighbors who had been nodding along with her accusations now exchanged uncertain glances. Officer Ramirez's eyebrows rose slightly as she watched the color drain from Eleanor's face. Officer Donnelly took a small step back, suddenly very interested in studying the perfectly manicured lawn. That's impossible," Eleanor finally managed, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. "You're lying. 2 weeks ago, I acquired controlling interest in Whitfield Transport Holdings," Nathaniel continued, his calm unchanged. "Your husband, Daniel Whitfield, specifically requested an afternoon meeting to discuss his concerns about the transition." He gestured toward his briefcase. "I arrived early to review the relevant documents before our discussion." The silence that followed was deafening. One of the neighbors who had been recording the confrontation slowly lowered his phone, as if suddenly aware he was documenting something very different from what he'd expected. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she finally lowered her own phone. "No," she said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. "No, Daniel would have told me if—" "Perhaps," Nathaniel said quietly. "There are many things your husband hasn't told you." The watching crowd had grown painfully still. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Officer Ramirez cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Brooks, would you like to press any charges regarding this incident?" she asked, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of something else. Perhaps respect, perhaps amusement. "That won't be necessary, officer," Nathaniel replied. "I believe Mrs. Whitfield was simply being vigilant about her neighborhood's security." The word vigilant hung in the air like smoke, its true meaning clear to everyone present. Eleanor's face flushed deep red, the color spreading down her neck and across her chest. I need to make a call," Eleanor announced, her voice pitched higher than before. Her fingers fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping it as she tried to dial. The same phone that moments ago had been her weapon was now her lifeline. Several neighbors began to drift away, suddenly finding their own lawns and homes intensely interesting. Others lingered, unable to tear themselves away from the spectacle of Eleanor Whitfield's authority crumbling in real time. Officer Donnelly shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Well, if there are no charges, you can't just—" Eleanor's voice cracked as she jabbed at her phone screen. "This isn't— Daniel will explain everything." Nathaniel stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed but dignified. He didn't need to move or speak. The truth had done all the necessary work. "Daniel!" Eleanor's voice rose sharply as her call connected. "Daniel, you need to come outside right now, right now!" She was practically shouting into the phone, her composure completely shattered. "There's a man here who's saying—" "No, listen to me. He's saying he owns the company. The police are here and—" "Just come outside." Officer Ramirez exchanged a look with her partner, then turned to Nathaniel. "Mr. Brooks, we apologize for any inconvenience. You're free to go about your business." "Thank you, officers. You've handled this situation very professionally." Nathaniel's words carried clearly enough that several remaining neighbors could hear the contrast between his composure and Eleanor's continuing phone hysteria. "Daniel, I don't care what you're doing. Get out here this instant." Eleanor had begun pacing in short, sharp lines across her driveway. "The whole neighborhood is watching. You have to come explain that this man is lying about—" Her voice trailed off as she stared at whatever response her husband was giving. The phone shook visibly in her hand. The officers began walking back to their cruisers, though Officer Ramirez kept glancing back, as if making sure the situation wouldn't escalate again. The remaining neighbors tried to look casual while straining to hear Eleanor's increasingly desperate phone conversation. "What do you mean, you'll be right there?" Eleanor's voice had dropped to a harsh whisper. "Daniel? Daniel!" She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it, her face a mask of confusion and growing dread. The front door opened with a sharp click. Daniel Whitfield emerged, his expression twisted with annoyance as he adjusted his tie. "Eleanor, what is all this commotion about? I was in the middle of—" His words died in his throat. The color drained from his face as his eyes locked onto Nathaniel standing beside the white Rolls-Royce. The transformation was instant and dramatic, from irritated husband to terrified executive in the space of a heartbeat. "Mr. Brooks," Daniel managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The name emerged strangled, as if fighting its way past a sudden constriction in his throat. Eleanor's head snapped between her husband and Nathaniel, her perfectly made-up face crumpling in confusion. The phone she'd been clutching like a weapon slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the driveway. You know him?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Daniel stepped forward mechanically, his movements stiff and unnatural. "Eleanor, this is Nathaniel Brooks. He's the new majority owner of Whitfield Transport Holdings." Each word seemed to cost him physical effort. "We completed the acquisition 2 weeks ago." The remaining neighbors leaned forward slightly, not even pretending to mind their own business anymore. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Eleanor's face as her last certainties crumbled. "But you never said," she started, then stopped, looking lost. "Mr. Brooks," Daniel continued, his voice rising to an unnaturally bright pitch, "I apologize profusely for this. Unfortunate misunderstanding. My wife didn't realize—" He gestured vaguely, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the mild temperature. Officer Ramirez watched the exchange with sharp eyes, her hand resting casually near her notepad. Even Officer Donnelly had stopped his retreat to the patrol car, sensing something off in Daniel's manner. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor burst out suddenly, the words tumbling over each other. "If I had known who you were, I never would have. You understand, don't you? We have to be careful about... Her voice trailed off as she realized how her words sounded. Several neighbors winced visibly. "About what exactly, Mrs. Whitfield?" Nathaniel asked quietly. His tone was mild, but the question hung in the air like a sword. Eleanor's mouth worked silently for a moment. "About... suspicious. About strangers in the neighborhood," she finished weakly. Daniel's hand shot out to grip his wife's arm, stopping her from speaking further. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion inside," he said quickly. "The meeting wasn't scheduled for another hour. But since you're here—" Nathaniel studied Daniel's face carefully. The man's fear went beyond simple embarrassment at his wife's behavior. There was something desperate in his eyes, something hunted. It reminded Nathaniel of executives he'd seen just before major fraud investigations broke. That same cornered look, that same barely controlled panic. "Of course," Nathaniel replied smoothly, "though I believe the officers haven't quite finished their report." Officer Ramirez stepped forward. "Actually, Mr. Whitfield, we do need to document this incident. Standard procedure when emergency services are called." Her tone was professional, but her eyes hadn't missed Daniel's growing agitation. "Is that really necessary?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Since Mr. Brooks isn't pressing charges—" "It's protocol," Officer Donnelly chimed in, having drifted back to join his partner. "Especially given the nature of the original call." Eleanor had begun to cry silently, careful tears that didn't disturb her makeup. But Nathaniel noticed she kept glancing at her husband rather than the officers, seeking cues, reading his reactions. Her apologies weren't about remorse. They were about realizing she'd accidentally challenged someone with more power than she had. "I really am sorry," she tried again, this time directing her words to Nathaniel. "If I'd known you were coming to meet Daniel, then the color of my skin wouldn't have been an issue?" Nathaniel finished for her, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made several observers flinch. Daniel's face went even paler, if that was possible. "Mr. Brooks, please, we should discuss the transition plans. I have all the documents ready inside." Officer Ramirez finished writing in her notepad, her pen moving deliberately across the page. "We'll need statements from both of you," she said to the Whitfields. "For the record." Daniel's hand was still locked around Eleanor's arm, his knuckles white with tension. He nodded jerkily, then turned to Nathaniel with an attempt at a professional smile that came across more like a grimace. "Shall we go inside?" he asked, gesturing toward the front door. "We can get started while the officers complete their paperwork." Nathaniel picked up his briefcase and moved toward the house. As he passed Daniel, he caught a whispered exchange between husband and wife. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor hissed. "Not now," Daniel muttered back urgently. Then, so quietly, Nathaniel almost missed it. "This is the worst possible night for this." The words carried the weight of genuine dread, confirming Nathaniel's growing suspicion that Eleanor's racist assumptions had accidentally exposed something far more troubling at the heart of the company he'd just acquired. The Whitfield home's grand foyer gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Eleanor hurried ahead, her heels clicking against the floor as she tried to transform from accuser to hostess. "Please, make yourself comfortable in the dining room, Mr. Brooks. Everything's ready." Nathaniel noted how quickly she'd switched to a sugary voice that didn't match her earlier venom. The dining room was a study in expensive taste. Dark mahogany table, silk curtains, and carefully arranged place settings that sparkled under recessed lighting. Daniel pulled out a chair at the head of the table. "Mr. Brooks, please, you should sit here." His hands shook slightly as he gestured to the seat. "Thank you." Nathaniel settled into the chair, laying his briefcase beside him. The leather felt like armor against his leg, filled with the preliminary reports he'd been reviewing before Eleanor's accusation. Eleanor appeared with a bottle of wine, her smile fixed and brittle. "This is a lovely Bordeaux. I hope you enjoy red wine?" Her fingers trembled as she poured, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. "That's fine." Nathaniel watched her carefully controlled movements. Every gesture screamed of someone desperate to pretend the last hour hadn't happened. "I've prepared coq au vin," she announced, her voice too bright. "It's a family recipe." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and nervous energy. Daniel spread papers across his end of the table, talking rapidly about quarterly projections. "As you can see, our Q3 numbers are quite strong. The merger transition has been smoother than expected in most departments." "Most departments?" Nathaniel picked up the subtle qualifier. "Minor adjustment issues. Nothing unusual for an acquisition of this size." Daniel's answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Eleanor returned with steaming plates, setting them down with exaggerated care. The food was artfully arranged, but Nathaniel noticed how her hand shook as she placed his plate, as if the mere act of serving him challenged everything she believed about the proper order of things. "I hope everything is to your satisfaction," she said, sinking into her chair. Her perfect posture couldn't hide how she perched on the edge of her seat, like a bird ready to flee. Nathaniel took a small bite, then turned back to Daniel. "I noticed some concerning patterns in the preliminary reports. Several discrimination complaints in the past year. All dismissed, without investigation." Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. "Those were thoroughly reviewed by HR. Standard procedure. The same HR department that hasn't promoted a single minority employee above middle management in 5 years." Nathaniel kept his tone mild, but the question landed like a stone in still water. Eleanor's knife scraped across her plate with a sharp sound. "Well, one has to consider fit," she said, apparently unable to help herself. "Company culture is so important." "Eleanor." Daniel's warning came too late. "I only mean," she continued, wineglass halfway to her lips, that some people simply aren't suited to certain positions. It's about maintaining standards. Standards? Nathaniel let the word hang in the air. Like assuming a black man in a Rolls-Royce must be a thief? The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor's face flushed red, then pale. Daniel jumped in, shuffling more papers. About those contract negotiations you mentioned earlier, I have the full breakdown here. I also noticed several major accounts were lost last quarter, Nathaniel continued, ignoring the attempt at deflection. All minority-owned businesses, all with excellent payment histories. Market fluctuations, Daniel said quickly. Natural turnover in a competitive industry. And the fact that they were all replaced by companies connected to board members' private interests? Daniel's fake smile cracked slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. Nathaniel took another careful bite. I'm asking direct questions about patterns that concern me. Eleanor stood abruptly, wine sloshing in her glass. I'll check on dessert. Her retreat to the kitchen carried an edge of panic. Mr. Brooks, Daniel leaned forward, voice low and urgent. I know today's incident was unfortunate, but I assure you, the company is stable. The last thing we need is unnecessary disruption. Unnecessary disruption, Nathaniel repeated. Is that what you call accountability? Eleanor returned with an elaborate chocolate torte, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. I do hope you'll stay for dessert, she said, her social mask slipping to reveal desperation underneath. We should put this afternoon's misunderstanding behind us. Some things shouldn't be put behind us, Nathaniel replied. They should be brought into the light and examined carefully. The rest of the dinner passed in strained conversation. Daniel kept steering topics toward safe territory. Market projections, facility upgrades, efficiency metrics. Eleanor alternated between forced cheerfulness and barely concealed resentment, each attempt at small talk revealing deeper prejudices. By the time Nathaniel stood to leave, the sun had set outside the dining room's tall windows. Eleanor's perfect hostess facade had crumbled into exhausted silence. Daniel's polished executive demeanor had developed visible cracks, revealing something darker beneath. Thank you for dinner, Nathaniel said formally, retrieving his briefcase. We'll continue our discussion about those reports soon. The evening shadows were deepening as he walked to his car. Once inside the Rolls-Royce, he pulled out his phone and dialed quickly. Alana? We need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. He glanced back at the Whitfield house, where Daniel stood watching from a window. Something's very wrong inside the company, and I need your legal expertise to uncover exactly what it is. Nathaniel's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise. At 6:30 a.m., the space was silent, except for the soft hum of climate control and the occasional ding of early elevator arrivals far below. The sun hadn't fully risen, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alana Brooks arrived precisely on time, her leather briefcase stuffed with preliminary acquisition documents she'd grabbed after her father's call the night before. She found Nathaniel standing at the window, still wearing yesterday's suit. "Did you even go home?" she asked, setting her coffee on the conference table. "Couldn't sleep?" Nathaniel turned from the window. Despite his wrinkled clothes, his eyes were sharp and focused. Something about that dinner kept nagging at me. The way Daniel reacted. It wasn't just embarrassment over Eleanor's behavior. "Tell me everything." Alana pulled out her laptop and legal pad. "Start with the moment you parked." Nathaniel described the afternoon in detail. Eleanor's immediate hostility, her performance for the gathering neighbors, the police response, and Daniel's telling reaction. As he spoke, Alana took rapid notes, her attorney's mind already categorizing potential legal implications. The dinner was worse, Nathaniel continued, pacing slowly. Eleanor kept making these little comments about fit and standards. But Daniel, He was terrified of any questions about HR practices or lost contracts. "Show me the workforce data that bothered you." Alana opened several spreadsheets. "The irregularities you mentioned." Nathaniel pulled up the company's personnel files on the conference room screen. "Look at the promotion patterns in Daniel's division over the last 5 years. I initially wrote it off as coincidence during the acquisition review, but now we know it might be policy rather than chance." Alana's fingers flew across her keyboard. "We need to move carefully, but quickly. If Daniel suspects we're investigating, he'll start covering tracks." Nathaniel sank into a chair, allowing himself to show the first signs of strain. "I kept my composure yesterday because I had to. But watching Eleanor perform her outrage, seeing those neighbors gather to watch—" He shook his head. "It brought back memories I thought I'd put behind me." "Dad." Alana stopped typing and met his eyes. "Your composure isn't weakness. It's exactly what makes you dangerous to people like the Whitfields. They expect anger they can dismiss. Your dignity forces them to face their own ugliness." "You sound like your mother," Nathaniel said softly, smiling slightly. "She taught us both well." Alana returned to her laptop with renewed focus. "Now, let's build this investigation properly. We need a complete audit, but it has to be subtle. No formal announcements, no obvious document requests." They spent the next hour mapping out their strategy. Alana created a detailed timeline for reviewing different aspects of company operations: promotion histories, vendor contracts, internal communications, and previous legal settlements. "I'll start with HR files," she said, organizing her notes, "looking for patterns in hiring, promotions, and departures. Then we'll trace the contract changes you noticed, see who benefited from dropping those minority-owned vendors." Eleanor's public accusation might actually help us, Nathaniel realized. Daniel will expect me to be distracted by that incident. He won't anticipate a deeper investigation so soon. Exactly. Alana pulled up another document. "And speaking of Eleanor's performance, I've already requested the police body cam footage. If she made any explicitly discriminatory statements, we can use that to establish a pattern of bias that might extend into company culture." The early morning light grew stronger as they worked, casting long shadows across the office floor. Outside, the city was coming alive, but they remained focused on their task, methodically building the framework for their investigation. At 8:02 a.m., they heard the first employees arriving in the outer office. Alana immediately switched to a different screen, maintaining their cover of a routine morning meeting. "I'll coordinate with our inside counsel," she said, keeping her voice professional as footsteps passed the door. "We'll need their cooperation, but carefully manage to avoid tipping our hand." Nathaniel nodded, straightening his tie. "I have meetings with department heads all day. I'll pay special attention to how they interact with their minority staff members. Sometimes the small moments tell the bigger story." They worked steadily through the early morning hours. Around 10:30 a.m., Alana suddenly sat up straighter, her eyes locked on her screen. "Dad," she said quietly, "look at this promotion record from Daniel's division." Nathaniel moved to look over her shoulder. The spreadsheet showed a clear pattern. Qualified black employees repeatedly passed over for advancement, their positions filled by less experienced white candidates. "Marcus Thompson," Alana pointed to one name. "MBA from Wharton. 8 years with the company, consistently excellent performance reviews. Passed over 4 times for promotion to regional manager. Each time, the position went to someone with half his experience." "And there are more like this?" Nathaniel asked, though he already knew the answer. "Many more," Alana confirmed, scrolling through the data. "This isn't coincidence, Dad. This is systematic." The morning sun now filled the office with harsh light, illuminating the first solid evidence of what they both suspected. Eleanor's driveway accusation wasn't an isolated incident of prejudice. It was merely the public face of a deeper, more insidious system of discrimination that had flourished under Daniel Whitfield's leadership. The executive conference room felt smaller with just 3 people inside. Nathaniel sat at the head of the long table, Alana beside him with her laptop open. Across from them, Teresa Hall smoothed her blazer with practiced calm, but her fingers trembled slightly. "I appreciate you meeting with us privately, Ms. Hall," Nathaniel said. "We're reviewing some personnel patterns that caught our attention." Teresa nodded carefully. "What would you like to know?" "Tell us about your experience with promotions in the Regional Operations Division," Alana suggested, her tone professional but gentle. Teresa's shoulders tensed, then deliberately relaxed. "I've been with the company 15 years. Started as a shift coordinator, worked my way up to Regional Operations Manager." She paused, choosing her words. "I've applied for the director position 4 times. "And what happened?" Nathaniel asked, though the personnel files had already told them. "I trained them," Teresa said quietly. "All 4 men who got the job instead of me. Each time, I was told they had leadership presence or executive potential. But I had taught them everything they knew about our operations." Nathaniel watched her face, noting the careful control in her expression. This wasn't fresh pain. It was an old ache she'd learned to carry. "The last one, Mike Stevens," Teresa continued. "He'd been with us barely 3 years. Asked me to show him our inventory management system because he'd never handled anything that complex. 2 months later, he was my boss." Alana typed steadily, documenting every detail. "Did you ever raise concerns about these decisions?" "Once." Teresa's laugh held no humor. "Filed a formal complaint about discriminatory promotion practices. HR said they'd investigate. 3 weeks later, they concluded everything was according to policy." She straightened a paper clip on the table. "The next quarter, my performance review mentioned I needed to work on being more collaborative." The morning light through the windows felt colder somehow. Nathaniel recognized the pattern, how systemic discrimination wrapped itself in professional language and procedural details. They thanked Teresa and took a brief break before Lionel Price arrived. The veteran dispatcher's gray hair and weathered face spoke to decades of experience. He settled into the chair with the careful movements of someone who'd learned to navigate troubled waters. "Mr. Price," Nathaniel began, "we understand you've been with the company for 28 years. 29 next month," Lionel corrected mildly. "Started when we still used paper logs for everything." "That's quite a perspective," Alana noted. "You must have seen a lot of changes." "Some things change." Lionel's eyes held a lifetime of observation. "Some stay the same, just get better at hiding." Over the next hour, Lionel described a pattern of complaints that vanished into administrative black holes, safety concerns from minority drivers that never reached review boards, scheduling conflicts that always seemed to disadvantage certain employees. "There was this young woman, Sandra Martinez," he recalled, "brilliant with logistics, knew every route and regulation. Filed a complaint about harassment from one of Daniel's friends in management. Next thing we knew, she was transferred to the night shift. 3 months later, she quit. Had 2 small kids, couldn't handle those hours." Nathaniel felt his jaw tighten. "And this happened often?" "Often enough that people stopped complaining," Lionel said simply. "Why risk your job when you know nothing will change?" Alana pulled up internal records on her laptop, cross-referencing dates and names. Every story matched the documentation, but the official versions were sanitized, wrapped in corporate language that masked the human cost. Through the afternoon, more employees shared similar experiences. Each story was unique, but the pattern was consistent. Careers stalled, complaints buried, opportunities redirected through unofficial channels that always seemed to lead back to Daniel's office. "It's like watching a magic trick," Alana said during a break between interviews. Once you know how it works, you see all the misdirection. Every discriminatory decision has a plausible explanation on paper. Nathaniel stood at the window, looking down at the city below. Eleanor Whitfield didn't invent her assumptions about who belongs where. She learned them from somewhere. He turned back to his daughter. This company taught her that power has a particular face. And Daniel reinforced it through every promotion, every dismissed complaint, every business decision that just happened to maintain the status quo, Alana added, reviewing her notes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the conference room floor when Nathaniel's phone buzzed. The message was from a board member he trusted. Daniel Whitfield was making rounds among key executives, describing Nathaniel as emotionally unstable and taking things personally after the incident with Eleanor. Nathaniel set the phone down carefully. The same poison that had flowed through Eleanor's accusations now moved through corporate channels, wrapped in concerns about stability and objectivity. But this time, Nathaniel had more than his dignity as a weapon. He had evidence, testimonies, and a daughter who knew how to use them. The truth was in the patterns, in the tired voices of people who had endured years of almost and not quite ready and not the right fit. Justice would need to reach deeper than one afternoon's public humiliation. It would need to uproot a system that had turned discrimination into policy and bias into business as usual. The executive boardroom hummed with quiet tension Thursday morning. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany table where 20 senior executives sat waiting. Daniel Whitfield stood at the front of the room, his silver hair perfect, his navy suit crisp, every inch the picture of corporate authority. "I understand everyone's concern," Daniel said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Recent events have been unsettling. But we need to maintain perspective." He smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "Change is always challenging, especially during acquisitions." Nathaniel Brooks sat quietly at the head of the table, watching Daniel work the room like a conductor leading an orchestra he'd rehearsed for years. Every gesture was calculated, every pause measured. "Our new owner," Daniel continued, glancing at Nathaniel with carefully crafted concern, "had an unfortunate encounter with my wife. A simple misunderstanding that seems to have affected his judgment." Harold Voss, a board member with 30 years of influence, nodded sagely. His jowls quivered with false sympathy. "We all understand how personal slights can cloud one's perspective." "Exactly," Daniel agreed. "And now we're seeing rather impulsive decisions, demanding personnel files, questioning established vendor relationships, reopening old complaints that were thoroughly investigated years ago." Nathaniel noticed the subtle signals passing between certain executives, shared glances, small nods, the old guard closing ranks. But he also saw newer faces shifting uncomfortably, their loyalty to the system not quite cemented. "I appreciate your concern for my judgment, Daniel," Nathaniel said quietly. The room fell silent. "So, let's examine some numbers with clear eyes." He opened a folder. "Can you explain why minority candidates with advanced degrees and decades of experience were passed over for promotion 6 times more often than their white counterparts in your division?" Daniel's smile never wavered. Promotion decisions involve complex factors beyond simple qualifications. Leadership fit, cultural alignment. "Cultural alignment," Nathaniel repeated. "Like Teresa Hall training 4 successive men who became her supervisor?" "Ms. Hall is a valuable employee," Daniel said smoothly, "but director-level positions require certain intangible qualities." Harold Voss cleared his throat. "We've always maintained high standards for leadership roles. Standards that have served this company well. Speaking of standards, Nathaniel continued, why are we paying Vertex Solutions 40% above market rate for basic logistics software? The same software other vendors offered at significantly lower costs? A younger executive near the end of the table sat up straighter. Daniel's response came quickly. Vertex's proprietary features justify the premium. Their track record includes 3 lawsuits for contract fraud, Nathaniel interrupted. And their CEO plays golf with you every Sunday. The room temperature seemed to drop. Daniel's polish cracked slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a tension in his jaw. I'm concerned that personal grievances are being transformed into baseless accusations. Then let's base them on facts, Nathaniel said. Where are the internal review files for complaints filed between 2019 and 2021? Human Resources shows them as submitted for executive review, but they never reached final documentation. Administrative oversights happen in any large organization, Harold offered quickly, especially during COVID disruptions. Interesting that these particular oversights affected every discrimination complaint filed during that period, Nathaniel noted, while other HR paperwork processed normally. Daniel stepped forward, his voice hardening beneath its professional veneer. Mr. Brooks, if you're suggesting impropriety, I'm not suggesting anything, Nathaniel said. I'm asking direct questions about documented patterns that coincidentally benefited certain executives while disadvantaging others based on very specific characteristics. The room divided itself in subtle ways. Some executives stared at their laptops, avoiding eye contact. Others sat straighter, watching the exchange with new interest. A few glanced nervously at Daniel, like courtiers gauging which way power was flowing. Perhaps we should table this discussion, Harold suggested, until emotions are less charged. My emotions are perfectly steady, Nathaniel replied, which is why I can clearly see the difference between a misunderstanding and a methodology. One happens by accident. The other happens by design. Daniel's smile had become a mask, stretched thin over growing fear. We've built this company's success on proven leadership principles. You've built it on buried complaints and inflated contracts, Nathaniel corrected. On qualified people pushed aside because they didn't fit your image of authority. That ends now. The afternoon sun had shifted, throwing Daniel's shadow long across the boardroom floor. His polished exterior couldn't quite hide the calculation behind his eyes as he realized this was not a man he could simply maneuver around. I move that we adjourn for today, Harold announced quickly. Give everyone time to review the concerns raised. The meeting dispersed in clusters of whispered conversations and worried glances. Daniel departed with his usual measured stride, but his neck was flushed red above his collar. Nathaniel remained seated, watching the power dynamics shift like weather patterns across the room. As evening approached, his phone buzzed with a message from his daughter. A staff assistant had called their office, worried about conversations she'd overheard. Eleanor Whitfield was busy at the Valley Oaks Country Club, telling anyone who would listen about her terrifying encounter with an aggressive man who was threatening her husband's company. The poison was spreading through social channels while Daniel worked the corporate angles. Nathaniel set down his phone. The battlefield had expanded beyond the boardroom, but that didn't change his strategy. Truth could be twisted, but facts left paper trails, and he had only begun to follow them. Eleanor Whitfield's living room gleamed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. 8 women perched on cream-colored sofas, wine glasses held delicately as Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I was terrified, she said, her voice trembling. Standing there alone, confronting this man who appeared from nowhere in our peaceful neighborhood. She took a steadying sip of Chardonnay. If the police hadn't arrived when they did. Patricia Morgan, president of the Valley Oaks Women's Association, reached over to pat Eleanor's knee. "You poor thing. How absolutely dreadful." "The worst part," Eleanor continued, setting her glass down on the marble coffee table, "is how he's now using his position to target Daniel. Making wild accusations, demanding investigations." She lowered her voice. "All because I dared to question why he was lurking near our home." The women exchanged knowing looks. This version of events, carefully curated and elegantly served alongside imported cheese, felt comfortably familiar. It fit their understanding of the world. A brave homeowner, a suspicious stranger, the natural order disrupted. "I heard he's been quite aggressive in board meetings," said Margaret Wheeler, whose husband golfed with Daniel. "Throwing around accusations of discrimination, if you can imagine." She rolled her eyes. "It's so tiresome how they always play that card." Eleanor nodded gratefully. "Daniel has built that company with integrity for 20 years. Now this man swoops in, looking for revenge over a simple misunderstanding." Across town, in Nathaniel's home office, a different scene unfolded. He and Alana sat watching cell phone videos that had begun circulating online. The clips were brief, shot from various angles by neighbors. Each captured fragments of the confrontation, but none showed the full context. "She's screaming at the man in the rolls." OMG police called on suspicious person in Valley Oaks. "Rich lady stands up to car thief. Plot twist at end." Comments below the videos ranged from openly racist to supposedly concerned about neighborhood safety. Eleanor's version of events spread through every post, growing more dramatic with each retelling. "They're painting you as unstable," Alana said, scrolling through social media. "Dangerous. Someone who bought the company just to settle a score." She looked up at her father. "We need to get ahead of this narrative before it solidifies." Nathaniel stood by the window, watching night settle over the city. Responding emotionally is exactly what they want. It would validate every stereotype Eleanor's selling to her friends. "But staying silent lets them control the story," Alana argued. "Every hour we wait, her lies sink deeper into people's minds." "Truth needs evidence," Nathaniel replied. "Not just denial." His phone buzzed with another message, this time from a country club member apologetically canceling their regular Saturday golf game. The excuse was polite, carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. Eleanor's campaign was working. "They're trying to isolate you socially while Daniel undermines you professionally," Alana said. "It's a coordinated attack." Nathaniel nodded. "Because they understand power isn't just about position. It's about belonging. They're telling everyone I don't belong in their world, not in their neighborhood, not in their company, not in their social circles." Back at the Whitfield home, Eleanor's performance reached its crescendo. "I feel unsafe in my own home," she whispered, voice breaking perfectly. "Daniel says he's becoming obsessed with finding ways to punish us, demanding private files, questioning longtime executives." She gestured helplessly. "All because I tried to protect our community." "You were absolutely right to be suspicious," Patricia assured her. "We have to be vigilant these days. Standards are dropping everywhere." The other women murmured agreement. They'd heard similar stories at other garden parties, charity luncheons, club gatherings. Stories that always ended with their way of life under threat from outsiders who didn't appreciate their values. "We're all behind you, Eleanor," Margaret declared. "The whole community knows what kind of people you and Daniel are." In Nathaniel's office, Alana's laptop chimed with an incoming email. She'd been running automated searches through company servers, looking for patterns in internal communications. Her eyes widened as she read. "Dad," she said, "look at this thread between Daniel and the Vertex Solutions CEO. They're discussing special considerations for contract approval. The dates match those inflated software purchases exactly." Nathaniel moved to read over her shoulder. More emails appeared, documentation of vendor meetings that never happened, altered bid comparisons, buried competitor proposals. The technical terms are vague, Alana continued, but the payment patterns are clear. They're routing extra fees through shell companies tied to board members. Cross-reference those companies with Harold Voss's financial disclosures, Nathaniel instructed. Eleanor's wine gathering was winding down, her friends departing with hugs and assurances of support. Each would spread her story further, adding their own embellishments, building a wall of polite disbelief around any truth that might threaten their carefully maintained reality. But in Nathaniel's office, reality was assembling itself in electronic paper trails and financial records. Alana's computer hummed as it compiled years of hidden transactions and buried decisions. The clock approached midnight. Spreadsheets filled with highlighted numbers glowed on Alana's screen. She looked up at her father with fierce determination. "We've got them," she said. "These emails prove Daniel's division has been manipulating contracts and hiding kickbacks for years. The board can't ignore this level of documentation." Thursday morning arrived with deceptive promise. Alana spread documents across the mahogany conference table in Nathaniel's office, organizing evidence into clear categories. Red folders held promotion records showing qualified minority candidates consistently passed over. Blue folders contained vendor contracts with inflated costs. Green folders revealed Daniel's electronic trail of questionable decisions. "The pattern is undeniable," Alana said, tapping the neat stacks. 5 years of systematic discrimination and financial manipulation, all flowing through Daniel's division. Nathaniel nodded, studying the executive summary she'd prepared. Clear enough for anyone willing to see it. That's the challenge. Alana straightened her blazer. Getting the board to actually look. They'd called an emergency session for 10 o'clock, giving board members just enough notice to attend, but not enough time for Daniel to mount a full defense. The strategy was surgical. Present evidence too solid to dismiss, force immediate action, and break the cycle of delay that protected corruption. By 9:45, the 15th floor boardroom began filling. Harold Voss arrived first, his silver hair perfect, his disapproval evident in every movement. Other directors followed, some curious, some concerned, some clearly already aligned against any disruption to their comfortable system. Daniel entered last, projecting calm confidence. He nodded to Nathaniel as if the previous day's tension had never existed. "Quite a dramatic summons this morning." "The evidence warranted urgency," Nathaniel replied evenly. Alana distributed packets containing key documents, carefully selected to demonstrate the scope of the problem without overwhelming detail. She remained standing, ready to walk the board through each section. "Before we begin," Daniel interrupted smoothly, "I feel compelled to address the elephant in the room." He looked around the table with practiced concern. This sudden investigation, these accusations, they didn't arise from routine oversight. They started immediately after an unfortunate incident at my home. Harold Voss leaned forward. "What incident?" "A regrettable misunderstanding," Daniel said. "My wife expressed concern about an unknown person near our property. She had no way of knowing it was our new owner. Mr. Brooks took understandable offense, but his response has become," he paused delicately, "disproportionate." "That's not accurate," Nathaniel started, but Daniel pressed on. Within hours of that encounter, he launched this aggressive investigation, demanded private files, questioned long-standing executives, all while making inflammatory accusations about discrimination. Daniel spread his hands. "I respect Mr. Brooks's accomplishments, but we can't let personal feelings override proper corporate governance." Harold Voss nodded sagely. "Revenge is a poor basis for leadership decisions." "This has nothing to do with revenge," Alana cut in. "The evidence speaks for itself. Page 3 shows clear patterns of promotional bias. Page 7 documents systematic contract manipulation, which Mr. Brooks only began investigating after my wife embarrassed him, Daniel noted. Curious timing, wouldn't you say? Other board members shifted uncomfortably. The narrative was taking hold, not because it was true, but because it felt safer than confronting years of institutional rot. The timing is irrelevant, Nathaniel said firmly. These documents prove serious misconduct. They prove selective interpretation, Harold countered. Any large company has complex personnel decisions and vendor relationships. Cherry-picking data to support a predetermined conclusion is dangerous, especially when motivated by personal grievance, Daniel added. Nathaniel watched his momentum crumbling. The truth lay exposed in those folders, but Daniel had given the board permission to look away. They could dismiss justice as revenge, protect their comfortable world, and sleep easily believing they'd acted responsibly. I move we table this discussion pending a formal review process, Harold announced. These are serious allegations that deserve proper procedure, not rushed judgment. Second, another director quickly agreed. We can't delay action on clear evidence of misconduct, Alana protested. We also can't let emotion override proper governance, Daniel replied smoothly. I welcome a thorough, balanced investigation through appropriate channels. The vote was quick and decisive, 8-3 in favor of delay. Daniel had transformed truth into a procedural inconvenience to be buried in committees and reviews. As the board members filed out, Nathaniel's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Reporter from Channel 8 News requesting comment on harassment allegations from Eleanor Whitfield. Claims you've used company position to intimidate her family after neighborhood incident. Nathaniel showed the message to Alana. Her jaw tightened. They're not just deflecting the investigation, she said. They're attacking your credibility directly. Through the boardroom's glass walls, they watched Daniel speaking quietly with Harold Voss and 2 other directors. His posture radiated reasonable concern. A man sadly forced to defend proper corporate order against emotional excess. He's turned the truth into a weapon against itself, Nathaniel observed. Made exposing wrongdoing look like proof of poor judgment. We have the evidence, Alana insisted. We just need to find a way past their comfortable blindness, Nathaniel finished. They'll bury facts in procedure, because the truth threatens their world. We need something they can't ignore, or reframe. His phone buzzed again. More reporters asking about Eleanor's claims. The story was spreading, carefully shaped to paint him as unstable and vindictive. In less than an hour, Daniel had transformed clear evidence of corruption into a story about wounded pride and reckless retaliation. The evening news flickered across Nathaniel's office wall. Channel 8's lead story showed Eleanor Whitfield, perfectly composed in pearls and a cream blazer, describing her terrifying encounter with an aggressive stranger who turned out to be her husband's new boss. I was just trying to protect our neighborhood, she said, eyes wide with manufactured concern. Now he's using his position to target my family. The reporter's voiceover added false gravity. Questions are being raised about potential abuse of corporate power following a suburban confrontation. Nathaniel muted the sound but left the images playing. He needed to witness how easily truth could be twisted, how his decades of building something honest could be recast as menace by someone who knew how to perform victimhood. We need to respond, Alana insisted, pacing the office. Let me draft a statement. Show the investigation predates this incident, release the promotion data, and feed their narrative about vengeful retaliation. Nathaniel shook his head. Daniel would love nothing more than for us to look defensive right now. So we just let them spread lies? No. We wait for the right moment. The truth matters more than my pride. His phone buzzed. Another reporter requesting comment. The story was spreading across local stations, each version slightly more sensational. Business publications were starting to pick it up too, framing it as a cautionary tale about post-acquisition tensions. Alana grabbed the remote and changed channels. There was Eleanor again, this time on Channel 4, describing how uncomfortable she felt, knowing someone she'd mistakenly questioned now controlled her husband's company. "She's good," Nathaniel admitted quietly. "Notice how she never quite says I threatened her? Just implies it. Leaves space for imagination to do the work. That's why we need to—" A knock interrupted them. Nathaniel's assistant stepped in. "Officer Ramirez is here. Says it's important." Elena Ramirez entered, still in uniform, but clearly off-duty. She closed the door carefully before speaking. "I've been watching the news coverage," she said. "It doesn't match what I saw that day." Nathaniel gestured for her to sit. "How so?" "I can't discuss everything officially yet, but I reviewed my body camera notes and incident report. Mrs. Whitfield made several statements to us that directly contradicted what we observed on scene. Such as? She claimed you approached her property aggressively. Camera shows you never left the curb. Said you refused to provide identification. We have clear footage of you immediately cooperating." Ramirez paused. "She also alleged you made threatening statements. The audio proves otherwise." "That helps," Alana said. "But will it matter? Eventually. These things take time to process properly. But I wanted you to know. Some of us see what's happening here." After Ramirez left, Nathaniel stood at his office window, watching darkness settle over the city. The lights coming on in other buildings reminded him of all the people working late, trying to build something lasting in a world that could turn against them in an instant. "You're exhausted," Alana said softly. "I'm angry," he corrected. "Not at being accused. I've handled worse. I'm angry that somewhere in this company, people are suffering under the same system that produced the Whitfields. Every day they come to work knowing merit matters less than maintaining comfortable lives. Then we keep fighting. We do. But tonight," he sank into his chair. "Tonight, I need to feel this. Really feel what it costs to stand against people who've never had their right to exist questioned." Alana squeezed his shoulder, understanding. She'd seen him weather countless storms with unwavering dignity. But even mountains need moments to acknowledge the rain. The news channels kept running Eleanor's interviews. Social media amplified selected clips. Comment sections filled with people who'd never met him debating his character based on carefully edited fragments of truth. "The loneliest part," he said after a long silence, "is knowing how many people will choose comfort over justice. They'll watch these stories and think there must be more to it, because the alternative threatens their world. Their comfort isn't our responsibility. No, but their victims are." Hours passed. Alana worked quietly, building their case despite the setbacks. Nathaniel reviewed quarterly reports, refusing to let scandal derail the actual work of running the company. Just past 11, Alana's laptop chimed with a new email. The sender was Grace Weller, a compliance analyst in Daniel's division. The subject line read simply, "Evidence you need to see." The message itself was brief. "I can't keep quiet anymore. I have documents, Mr. Whitfield never meant anyone to find. Internal communications, deleted reports, real vendor numbers. Please help make this right." Alana looked up at Nathaniel. "This could be—" "Don't say it yet," he cautioned. "We've had enough false summits today." But something in Grace's words felt different. Not a promise of victory, just a reminder that even in systems built on polished lies, someone always knows the truth. And sometimes they find the courage to speak it. Friday morning arrived with a gray drizzle that made the empty office building feel like a confessional. Grace Weller sat ramrod straight in her chair, hands clasped tightly around a thick manila envelope. The overhead fluorescents hadn't even warmed up fully, casting strange shadows across the conference room. "Take your time," Nathaniel said softly, noting how Grace's fingers trembled. "You're safe here." Alana placed a cup of coffee in front of Grace, the gentle clink of ceramic breaking the tense silence. "We understand how difficult this must be." Grace drew a shaky breath. "I've worked in compliance for 8 years. I thought maybe I was imagining things at first. Little irregularities, promotion reviews that didn't add up, vendor contracts that seemed inflated." She pulled out a stack of papers, spreading them carefully across the table like pieces of a painful puzzle. "But then I started noticing patterns. Every time a minority employee filed a complaint, it would get routed through Mr. Whitfield's office. And somehow, those files would always end up incomplete or missing key documentation." Nathaniel picked up the first document, an email chain with multiple replies deliberately removed. But Grace had preserved the original thread. In it, Daniel discussed maintaining appropriate cultural alignment in senior positions, followed by thinly veiled instructions to find reasons to block specific promotions. "How long have you been collecting these?" Alana asked, already taking detailed notes. 3 years. Grace's voice cracked slightly. "At first, I just started keeping copies because something felt wrong. Then I saw qualified people getting passed over again and again. Teresa Hall should have been regional director 2 years ago. Marcus Watson had perfect evaluations, but somehow never made it past middle management." She pulled out more papers, performance reviews with original high scores, later amended with vague concerns about leadership presence or organizational fit. "But this—" Grace's hand shook as she removed a final printed email from her envelope. "This is what made me realize I couldn't stay quiet anymore." The message was dated 2 weeks ago, just after the acquisition. Daniel had written to Harold Voss, "Need to clean house before the new owner starts digging where he shouldn't. Too many loose ends in the quarterly reports. Get IT to do another sweep of the servers." Nathaniel read it twice, his expression unchanged, but his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Did they know you had access to these communications?" Grace shook her head. "I was supposed to be invisible. Just another analyst processing paperwork. They never thought anyone was watching." "What made you decide to come forward now?" Alana asked gently. Grace's fingers twisted together. "I saw Mrs. Whitfield on the news last night, playing the victim, twisting everything around. And I thought about all the real victims, the people whose careers were destroyed, whose lives were affected." She looked directly at Nathaniel. "I couldn't bear the weight of knowing anymore." "Coming forward took tremendous courage," Nathaniel said quietly. "I want you to know that we'll protect you. Whatever happens next, your job is secure." "It's not just about the job anymore." Grace's voice strengthened slightly. "I need to be able to look in the mirror again." Alana began organizing the documents into clear categories: discrimination evidence, financial irregularities, deleted communications. Each piece alone was damaging. Together, they revealed years of systematic corruption. "Some of these vendor contracts," Alana noted, "show clear inflation patterns. Always the same companies, always routed through Daniel's department." "He has personal connections with most of those vendors," Grace confirmed. "Family friends, golf partners. The real numbers are buried in secondary reports that never make it to final review." Nathaniel studied a particularly telling email thread. "This proves he knew exactly what he was doing. No ambiguity, no plausible deniability." The morning light grew stronger outside, but they remained focused on the evidence before them. Grace explained each document's context, pointing out key names and dates. Her technical knowledge combined with years of quiet observation painted a devastating picture of power abused and truth buried. "I should have spoken up sooner," Grace said finally, exhaustion evident in her voice. "You spoke up when it mattered most," Nathaniel assured her. "Sometimes courage takes time to build." Just then, Nathaniel's phone buzzed. Officer Ramirez's name appeared on the screen. "Mr. Brooks," her voice was clear and professional. "We've just received security footage from one of your neighbors from the incident. They've agreed to release it voluntarily." Nathaniel put the phone on speaker as Alana and Grace listened. "The footage shows the entire confrontation," Ramirez continued, "including several statements Mrs. Whitfield made that directly contradict her public claims." Grace looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at the phone broadcasting proof of Eleanor's lies. "The truth always finds a way," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. The morning drizzle had turned to steady rain, drumming against the windows like applause for secrets finally spoken aloud. The security footage played on Nathaniel's laptop with crystal clarity. The morning sun filtered through his office windows as he, Alana, and Grace watched the scene unfold in stark digital detail. The camera's high-mounted angle captured everything. The precise moment Eleanor Whitfield emerged from her house, her aggressive stance, the theatrical way she pointed at Nathaniel while making her 911 call. "The timestamp shows she didn't even give him 30 seconds, Alana noted, her pen tapping against her legal pad. "No reasonable conversation, no attempt to verify anything." The audio was surprisingly clear. Eleanor's voice rang out, "There's a suspicious man trying to steal a car. You need to send someone immediately." Then, moments later, "He must have stolen it. People like that don't own cars like this." Grace winced at Eleanor's tone. She sounds so certain, so entitled to her assumption. They watched as the police arrived. The footage caught Eleanor's dramatic performance, her insistence that Nathaniel's valid documentation must be fake, her phone raised high as she narrated her version of events to her social media audience. "Every false claim," Nathaniel said quietly. "Every escalation. All preserved." Alana was already typing rapidly on her phone. "I'm contacting Megan Doyle from the Chronicle. She's the one who ran the initial story about Eleanor's complaints against you." "Will she listen?" Grace asked. "Megan's smart," Alana replied. "She knows something wasn't right about Eleanor's version. We're not giving a defensive statement. We're showing her everything. The footage, Grace's documents, the whole pattern." Nathaniel nodded slowly. No more measured responses. No more letting them control the narrative. Within an hour, Megan Doyle sat in Nathaniel's office, her professional skepticism evident as she reviewed the security footage for the third time. She paused frequently, taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Whitfield's public statement claimed you were confrontational," Megan observed. "This shows quite the opposite." "Keep watching," Alana suggested. The footage continued to play. Eleanor's voice became increasingly shrill as she demanded the officers arrest Nathaniel even after they verified his identification. The camera caught her exact words. "I don't care what his papers say. He doesn't belong here." Megan's eyebrows rose. "That's explicitly different from what she told me." "Now," Alana said, sliding Grace's documents across the desk, "let's talk about why the Whitfields felt entitled to act this way." For the next 2 hours, they walked Megan through the evidence. Grace's careful documentation revealed years of systematic discrimination. Denied promotions, buried complaints, vendor fraud. Each piece connected to Daniel Whitfield's office. "The driveway incident wasn't isolated," Nathaniel explained. "It was a symptom of a culture Daniel built, where certain people were considered inherently suspicious, inherently unworthy." Megan studied an email thread showing Daniel explicitly blocking a minority candidate's promotion. "This goes beyond bias. This is intentional discrimination." And financial fraud, Alana added, pointing to the vendor contracts. Notice how these numbers never matched the final reports? Grace spoke up softly but firmly. I watched it happen for years. Every time someone questioned it, they were pushed out or passed over. Megan looked up from her notes. Why come forward now? Because truth matters more than comfort, Nathaniel replied. Because systems don't change unless someone forces them to face evidence they can't dismiss. The reporter nodded slowly. This isn't just about clearing your name anymore, is it? It never was, Nathaniel said. Eleanor's accusation was just the public face of something much uglier, something that hurt a lot of people for a long time. Alana's phone buzzed with another email from Officer Ramirez. The police are formally amending their incident report. They're noting multiple false statements made by Mrs. Whitfield during the call and at the scene. Nathaniel stood, his decision made. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. And contact the board. We need an emergency session before that. Going public with everything? Megan asked. Everything, Nathaniel confirmed. The footage, the documents, the patterns of discrimination, the financial irregularities. No more pieces. The whole truth. Grace straightened in her chair. I'll testify if needed. I'm done being afraid. Alana was already making calls. I can have the board assembled by 9 a.m. The press conference could follow at 11. Perfect, Nathaniel said. Time for everyone to see exactly what kind of company Daniel Whitfield was running and exactly what kind of assumptions his wife acted on. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as they prepared. Megan continued reviewing documents, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Grace organized her files chronologically, building an undeniable timeline of corruption. Alana coordinated with the board secretary and communications team. Nathaniel watched them work, feeling the weight of years of silent injustice finally shifting. Tomorrow, truth would have its say, not in whispers or buried files, but in clear daylight with cameras rolling. The security footage played one final time on his laptop. Eleanor Whitfield stood frozen on the screen, pointing in accusation, so certain of her power to define reality. She had no idea she was being recorded, no idea that her moment of entitlement would become evidence of everything wrong with the system she represented. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation as cameras focused on the podium. Nathaniel Brooks stood perfectly still, his dark suit crisp, his expression composed. The morning light streamed through tall windows, highlighting the screen behind him where the security footage waited to play. Thank you for coming, he began, his voice steady and clear. Recent events have brought serious issues to light. Rather than offer interpretations, I'll present evidence and let it speak for itself. He nodded to his technical team. The security footage began to play. The room fell silent as Eleanor Whitfield's recorded voice filled the space, her accusations sharp and clear. They watched her immediate aggression, her refusal to listen, her performance for her phone camera. When she declared that people like that don't own cars like this, several reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Whitfield made 7 demonstrably false statements to police during this incident, Nathaniel continued, displaying a time-stamped list. Officer Ramirez has provided an amended incident report noting each one. A reporter raised his hand. Did Mrs. Whitfield attempt to contact you after learning your identity? Yes, Nathaniel replied. She offered what she called an apology. But it's important to understand this incident was not isolated. It reflected deeper problems within the company culture. Grace Weller stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly but her voice firm. For 3 years, I documented systematic discrimination in hiring and promotion decisions. She began presenting specific examples. Qualified minority candidates repeatedly blocked, complaints buried, suspicious contracts approved. The reporters' pens moved frantically. The story was visibly shifting under their eyes from a neighborhood dispute to something far more significant. Every decision required Daniel Whitfield's approval, Grace explained, displaying email chains. These patterns were intentional and consistent. Megan Doyle, seated in the front row, asked the question everyone was thinking. How long has this been happening? The documented cases go back 5 years, Nathaniel answered. The financial irregularities tied to vendor contracts extend even further. He displayed spreadsheets showing inflated costs and missing funds. The numbers told their own story of systematic corruption. The room had grown completely still. The only sound the click of cameras and scratch of pens. We've provided complete copies of all documentation to relevant authorities, Nathaniel concluded. The board meets in 30 minutes to address these findings. The emergency board session convened in the main conference room. Harold Voss sat rigid in his chair, his usual confidence cracking as he reviewed the evidence packets. Daniel Whitfield arrived looking polished as ever, but his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. "This is a vindictive witch hunt," Daniel declared, straightening his tie. "Mr. Brooks is retaliating because of a simple misunderstanding with my wife." "The evidence predates that incident by years," Alana pointed out. "Are you claiming these documents are falsified?" "I'm claiming context is being manipulated," Daniel insisted, but his voice had lost its usual authority. Harold Voss cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take time to review?" "Every delay protected this behavior," Nathaniel cut in. "Every review buried another complaint. That ends today." The boardroom door burst open. Eleanor Whitfield stormed in, face flushed with anger. "You can't do this to us. We built this company." "Mrs. Whitfield, this is a closed session," Alana stated firmly. But Eleanor was already realizing something had changed. The board members who usually smiled at her looked away. The room had no interest in her performance. Her social currency had suddenly become worthless. "All those in favor of immediate termination?" Nathaniel asked quietly. Hands rose around the table. Even Harold Voss, seeing no escape, raised his slightly trembling fingers. Daniel stared at his former allies, watching decades of carefully maintained power crumble in minutes. "Effective immediately," Nathaniel declared. "Security will escort you out." As the Whitfields emerged from the building, reporters swarmed. Their cameras caught Eleanor's mascara-streaked face, Daniel's shattered composure. No amount of polish could hide their fall from grace. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you stand by your statements to police?" "Mr. Whitfield, what do you say to allegations of systematic discrimination? Did you knowingly file false reports?" The questions followed them across the parking lot, each one stripping away another layer of their carefully constructed facade. Eleanor tried to shield her face with her designer handbag, while Daniel hurried her toward their car, neither of them managing even a semblance of dignity. Back in his office, Nathaniel watched the corporate security team sealing Daniel's office and securing his files. Computer forensics experts were already preserving evidence. The company's legal team huddled with federal investigators, reviewing Grace's documentation. "The Financial Crimes Unit wants to interview you Monday," Alana reported, entering with a stack of papers. "And 3 civil rights organizations have called about systematic discrimination cases." Nathaniel nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond punishment. He studied the organizational chart on his wall, seeing not just what needed to be torn down, but what could be built in its place. Years of qualified people held back, of talent ignored, of potential wasted. That was where real justice would begin. A knock at his door revealed Officer Ramirez. She stepped in, still in uniform, looking satisfied but professional. "The department is reviewing all recent complaints from that neighborhood," she said. "Mrs. Whitfield's name appears in several involving suspicious persons who turned out to be legitimate visitors or residents. "Thank you for doing the right thing," Nathaniel replied. "Truth matters," she said simply, then hesitated. The other officers are watching this case closely. It's changing perspectives. Sunday morning painted the suburban streets in gentle autumn light. Nathaniel's white Rolls-Royce gleamed as he parked it exactly where the confrontation had occurred days before. This time, instead of suspicious faces behind curtains, neighbors gathered openly on their lawns, watching a stage being assembled on the community green. Teresa Hall stood near the podium, reviewing her notes. Her new interim regional director badge caught the sunlight. After 20 years of being overlooked, she carried herself with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with revenge, and everything to do with finally being recognized. Lionel Price sat in the front row, his family beside him. His grandchildren wore their Sunday best, beaming at their grandfather. The retirement plaque in his lap acknowledged not just his years of service, but the wisdom that had helped expose the truth. "The crowd's bigger than we expected," Alana said, joining her father near the stage. Word spread fast. Nathaniel nodded, watching more cars arrive. "Good. This needs witnesses, just like last time, but for something better." Community leaders began taking their seats. Pastors, teachers, small business owners. Officer Ramirez arrived in dress uniform, representing the police department officially. She gave Nathaniel a respectful nod, then took her place near the stage. At precisely 10 o'clock, Nathaniel approached the microphone. The morning sun warmed his face as he surveyed the gathered crowd. Some faces were familiar from that tense Tuesday afternoon, but their expressions had changed. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today marks a new chapter, not just for our company, but for this community. First, I'd like to introduce Teresa Hall, our new interim regional director." Teresa stepped forward to warm applause. Her voice was strong and clear as she outlined her vision for the department she'd helped build from the ground up. "Merit matters," she declared. "Experience matters. And now, finally, everyone who earns their place will find the door open." Nathaniel returned to the microphone. "Next, we honor someone whose dedication deserves full recognition. Lionel Price, please join us." Lionel walked slowly to the stage, his grandchildren watching with shining eyes. Nathaniel presented the plaque personally, reading the inscription, "For 30 years of excellence, integrity, and courage to speak truth when truth was needed most." The old dispatcher's hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes held decades of vindication. Then came the announcement they'd gathered for. Nathaniel unveiled the new Brooks Foundation for Business Excellence, a comprehensive program combining scholarships, apprenticeships, and mentoring opportunities. The first phase would fund 50 positions, prioritizing qualified candidates who had been previously overlooked. "Success shouldn't depend on who you know," Nathaniel explained. "It should depend on what you can do, what you're willing to learn, and how hard you're willing to work." He gestured to a group of young people seated near the stage, the first cohort of scholarship recipients. They sat tall, dressed professionally, ready to begin their journey. Among them was Grace Weller's nephew, who had dreamed of joining the company but watched others with fewer qualifications move ahead of him. The applause was genuine this time, not the polite golf claps of charity events. These were people who understood the difference between handouts and opportunities. They had seen both sides of power, the kind that crushed and the kind that lifted. Officer Ramirez stepped forward next, not to speak, but to present Nathaniel with an official commendation. The police department was acknowledging his composure during the confrontation and his commitment to community improvement. The gesture carried weight. Law enforcement publicly choosing truth over prejudice. As the ceremony concluded, neighbors who had stood silent during Eleanor's accusations now approached to shake Nathaniel's hand. Some offered quiet apologies for not speaking up. Others asked about applying to the scholarship program for their children. The atmosphere had transformed from suspicion to possibility. Teresa gathered her new team for a photo, her smile radiant. Lionel's grandchildren ran across the grass, playing near the Rolls-Royce without a single worried glance from their parents. The car that had sparked such drama now seemed to belong exactly where it was parked. Notable in their absence were the Whitfields. Their house stood empty, shades drawn. Eleanor's carefully cultivated social circle had evaporated. The country club had quietly revoked their membership. Their carefully constructed world had crumbled because they couldn't imagine a different kind of power, one built on merit instead of privilege. As the crowd began to disperse, Nathaniel watched the scholarship recipients talking excitedly with their new mentors. He saw Teresa directing her staff with natural authority. He noticed Officer Ramirez chatting easily with community members who once would have viewed her with suspicion. The late afternoon sun caught the Rolls-Royce's hood ornament, sending bright reflections across the lawn. Alana appeared at his side, carrying their briefcases. "Ready to go?" she asked. Nathaniel took one last look at the scene. The mingling crowds, the discarded programs blowing across the grass, the stage being dismantled in the golden light. Everything that had happened here, both the ugly and the triumphant, had served a purpose. "Yes," he said simply, reaching for his car keys. "If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day."